Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Hey, today my guest is Aden Eyob. She is a clinical neuroscientist and author of the book Mind Training: The Secret for Positive Living. In addition, she is the founder and CEO of Mind Medication, a fusion of neuroscience-psychology and spirituality-based mindset consulting, coaching, and speaker service that helps you uncover your why, unlock potential, and free limiting beliefs to achieve the impossible. Her clients include CEOs, entrepreneurs, and celebrities. Her vision: a world free from limiting beliefs. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Aden.
Thank you for having me here.
So we met on a virtual call. I was doing a thing and met you and realized you wrote a book, and I thought the title was very interesting. It's called The Book on Mind Training: The Secret for Positive Living. And I was like, I want to read this. And I actually was not expecting what I found. Wow. Okay. So I don't know where to start with, I don't know where to start with this other than your childhood experience was a bit harrowing. I mean, I don't even know where we start. You know, there's the Africa experience, the Europe experience, there's the not knowing who your father was and being lied to. And I mean, all sorts of interesting and also yucky things going on with abuse and mental abuse and gaslighting. It's amazing after you read it that you're where you are now. And so a testament to you and to the work that you've done with yourself, because that was a lot of trauma. I don't know where we want to begin with your sort of like royal African story and how you kind of came to be where you are now. But let's just start somewhere and tell us about some of those things I mentioned. Or
Yes, so it was quite dense, I must admit. And the reason I was quite intentional is because I believe in transparency, and in other prescriptive memoirs I've read, it can be a little bit vague. And so I felt called to be truthful in maybe the areas that are very hard to speak on, because when we're transparent, then the hope is that somebody who's reading that may be in a similar journey, but in the end can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but more importantly can see how a change in perspective can change circumstances that are dire like that. And so that's why I went into detail. But to start with, yes, my background, so my mom's side of the family is part of the Ethiopian royal family. I didn't get that privilege. So by the time I was born, the royal family had been dismantled. A lot of them had fled to Europe, mainly in the UK, and some to the US. And so really it was, by the time even my mother was in her 20s, it already had crumbled. But our generation didn't really see that. But I remember, seeing my aunts and uncles, and they're still living off of that royal mindset. And I found it quite hard to comprehend the way sometimes they would talk about people as though they're less than. And given that I grew up in an environment that equated to less than, yet had royal blood, I was like, well, excuse me. I don't know what you're talking about. We're all the same. But it's all going back to mindset, and that comes from a lack of self-belief. And it took me a long time to realize that. And now it's like coming from a place of compassion. But growing up, it built in me a lot of anger and resentment.
Yeah. And you go off in the book, which I appreciate. You're very transparent and honest about exactly what you were feeling during certain times. I mean, listen, your mom chased you with a knife. There was some really effed up stuff going on, and a lot of lying, a lot of gaslighting. And I mean, wow, it resonates because the way you talk about it is exactly the way the reader, when they're reading it, is feeling about that situation, whether you went through it or not. We're going, yeah, fuck them. Yeah, what the fuck? What the hell? Like we understand your anger. I'm glad you expressed it. Okay, I mean, I don't know where to start. So let's just start with your mother. This is a rough one. A lot of people got rough moms out there. Shit, man, I've never read. This is a bad one. When I was reading about yours, I just wanted to cry for you.
Yeah, so at the time when I wrote the book, I was still in my healing process with my mother. Thankfully, we actually have a good relationship now. So, out of misery, miracles can come about. But yeah, growing up, it was a very hard life in my relationship with my mother because she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so I grew up until I was about 6 years old with my grandma. So I don't really have much memory of her, just the odd phone calls to Ethiopia and hello, I'm your mother and so forth. But it was really when I moved to the UK to live with her that I got to really understand and see the extent of her mental illness. And when you have paranoid schizophrenia in general is never pleasant, but paranoid schizophrenia, you hear voices. And so it was quite challenging growing up with a mother that I didn't already have a relationship with. And now there's a mental health element. And so I think at that point, I couldn't quite distinguish who was my mother and who was the mental illness, but it was also an inspiration because it led me to want to understand the brain. And so why I studied neuroscience and psychology is in part to her, actually, and in really wanting to understand her, other family members who had mental conditions and why they behaved the way they did, and with the aim of finding a solution. And so even though my experiences with my mom as a child growing up was not pleasant, it's amazing how such a dark season can be the seed for something healing, and that can help. And so part of what I'm doing now is stems from the fact that I had that turbulent relationship with my mother.
Right, which is where a lot of people, right? They go through something rough and they're here to, your test is your testament kind of thing. Yeah, I forgot to mention you are a clinical neuroscientist, NLP practitioner, mindset consultant, and coach, of course. Even though that was mentioned in the intro, just wanted to throw that in there. And let's talk about, so okay, mental illness, and so that led to lots of lies, particularly about who your father was. There were like 3 tries about people trying to tell you. I was going, I'm like, oh nope, this is not the one, nope, next one, nope, that's not it. And each time you were lied to and be like, that's the guy, and you're like, yep, nope. And so tell us a bit
Just kidding.
about this lying. And then finally you got to a DNA test when someone was like, no, this is definitely your uncle, and you're like, yeah, no, it's not. So what's that story? Give us a rundown on that.
Yeah, so honestly, I used to joke. I was like, I'm sure my next father is from like another continent now because I'm going down all the different checklists. But I'm always on edge until I got the DNA test about who my father would be. But essentially, being a scientist, I put on my scientist hat, and it just wasn't adding up. The stories that she was telling me just didn't make sense, and so that's where I just decided enough is enough. I need answers, I need solutions, and I don't want to live my life confused, because if I leave this feeling and an identity crisis unattended, that could lead to suicidal ideations. It could lead to conflicts in my relationships with my friends, my other family members, coworkers, because not knowing who I am is going to be a problem now, but also later down the line. And I just was not willing to put a price on peace. And so I found that the only way to really get answers at this point was to do a DNA test. Can't get any more rational and objective than a DNA test, right? And so by doing that, I got healing, I got closure, and but also peace, which is something I had lacked. And then I was able to say, this is who I am, this is my father, and understand who I am, because I finally have these answers that I was not able to explain to my friends or to myself, more importantly. And not knowing who I was creating a conflict within. So there was incongruency that was needing resolution. And so the DNA test wasn't just to get an answer of yes or no, but more so to bring in that emotional healing that I really needed, and just peace ultimately. But I think, when I've thought this through as well, and with my mom, we laugh about this time now because the pain has healed. But in her defense, she she acted from a place of what she knew. So from her mental model, the upbringing that she came from, I'm not excusing her behavior, but what I can do is extend compassion and understanding now that I've had that healing and better insight into why she made those decisions, and be in a place to help her to come to congruency with herself, and to be able to speak the truth even if it hurts, and have these difficult conversations, because in order to bring peace and healthy relationship, we have to be in a place where we can speak our truths even if it hurts, but knowing how to do that is going to be key. And so I like
Tell
to
us what
think
you
this was
found
a
about, tell us what you found out about the DNA test.
well, the DNA test was pretty clear that the man that she had said was my father, could not be
Right.
anywhere related to me. It was very clear that there was no correlation, and that was difficult because I had made a connection thanks to her to the uncle, who the supposed uncle, and so
Yes, and they
I
were
was
like, "Oh, we've been wanting to meet you. We're so excited. We've been held." They thought also as
all
well
these
the
years
lie.
that
They
I was
believed this lie,
their
which would have paid for them. They tried and they couldn't, and they wouldn't let you see. They wouldn't let us see you, and all this stuff, which was probably painful
absolutely.
for them.
Absolutely. So I got put in a position to now have this difficult conversation with my uncle and say, look, I've got the test. We're not related. And, this is almost what, 30, coming up to 30 years of lies. He'd built up thinking that I was his niece, and that was not the case. But I believe, as painful as it is, it's always better to rip the band-aid with grace and compassion than to keep it there and let the lie fester, because that's when we create instability within ourselves, and that could lead to, in itself, other forms of mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us, have you made any headway in finding out who the real
Yeah, so it is my father in America. So thankfully, it wasn't somebody new. Although sometimes I'm always like, are you sure? But then I have a DNA test to prove it. So
Tell us about your
I get
father in
peace in
America.
that.
What's he like? What's his, ethnicity? What's his breakdown? What's his
Yes. So he's part Ethiopian and has a mixture, from my understanding, of Greek, Italian, and Jew, but predominantly Ethiopian. So he has 4 kids. And over the years, we've built a bond. It took time, but
nice.
we've gotten there, which is great. And unfortunately, he lived in Kansas, and that was not a place I was willing to live. I was an LA girl, so I would
Fuck
only
no,
see
you
him.
don't. No offense to anyone out there in Kansas, but yeah, that would be rough if you were somewhere.
I only saw him during summers and so forth. It was a hard relationship because I also came in with a higher expectation. I wanted him to be everything my stepfather wasn't, and he didn't live up to that. So being a teenager as well, that didn't help, because then I was really angry.
Yeah, you're like,
And
oh, and
so
I
I
found him,
wasn't
and he's not great. Yeah.
I was like, gee, thanks. But in all fairness, I mean, he did try. At the time, I felt like it was a little too late. But now that I've had more time to sit on it and think about it, he did make effort. Unfortunately, at the time, I was still pretty angry, and he died from a car accident. And so we never really got to get to a place where we were okay again. We were not on talking terms, and I think that lesson has taught me now, with loved ones, even the ones who are difficult, that time is precious and it's not worth it. Ultimately, I will never be able to really express how I felt to him in his physical entity, but I found peace and grace in being able to journal it out, speak to the universe. And eventually, my plan is to go perhaps this year, to where he's been buried in Ethiopia, and sort of create that closure as well, and
Mhm.
make my peace. And so this was another lesson in itself, that when we let anger and grudge and bitterness stay, it occupies. And then when the time comes, if that person leaves, it creates a void. And so to avoid that, it's best to have honesty and these difficult conversations, and to express the pain that I was feeling, then hold it in, and then I will not be able to explain it to him in person now, because he's gone. But also, it taught me that his mistakes are not my siblings' mistakes. I don't need to have anger or animosity towards them. They didn't know about any of this. They are innocent. And so I think that freed me to love them and allow them into my life, even though they abruptly showed up. Now
Right.
I have now I have the opportunity to grow with them instead of actively avoid them, because ultimately they are a part of my identity and who I am.
Yeah. So you've, aside from some of the trials and tribulations we've discussed, gosh, aside from abuse, you dealt with being told you were stupid, which led to some moments there in your professional career. And then also you had a couple of issues, not that you wouldn't in general, being a person of color in this world, but confronted with racism. And
Yes.
I think the first time, you know what? I think the second story is really great because it shows you taking control, the one with the HR person.
Hmm.
Can you tell us what happened there?
Yeah.
I just think people like
So
need to hear, because if you're out there and you're white and you're listening and you're like, oh, whatever, Monday, no one, nope, it's still happening. So I just
it's still happening.
want
Yes.
you to share the
Race
story.
Racism doesn't take a bedtime break, unfortunately.
Right.
But yeah, so this incident happened back in the UK. I was in my early 20s and I was working in a market research firm that was predominantly 99% British white. And so there was me and one Indian lady as a token of diversity. And for me, I've grown up with all diverse backgrounds, so it didn't really bother me too much because I like to think at the time I knew how to speak to different levels of people, business, cultural upbringing. But this one was a very challenging situation. I had been hired by the CEO for a different role within the pharmaceutical sector of the business, but unfortunately, due to the delay and the way that was coming into fruition, he proposed that I go into market research until they build out that part of the business, and then I can go into it. And so I joined the market research. I had no market research background, but I was a quick learner. And so I had taken on a line manager that I didn't really get to know in the interview process. And I think that makes a big difference, to be honest, because I don't know if I would have joined if I had known she would be my line manager. But all that to say, everything was fine for the first couple of months. But what I started to pick up was these snarky remarks on Black people or people of color in general. And
No, tell
and
us what
I
you heard. Tell us what they said.
so sometimes it would just in conversation be like, oh, these monkeys. So they're not really even subtle. They're pretty
And
loud.
I was going to say,
Uh,
that's not subtle. You're like
they're not
snarky. That's
subtle.
fucked up. That is like
No,
ultra
yes,
horrible. Yeah.
it is. But sometimes I think at the time I was like, no, that they can't be saying that about Black people. I
Right.
think I was
It's almost
in
denial
denial
because it's
more
so
than
crazy.
anything.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I kept my mouth shut because I was like, no, this is ridiculous. Not we can't be talking about monkeys. What's she talking about? But it kept going on, and how Black people are not that smart and so forth. And I'm thinking, good God, what does she think I?
That was the
I'm just so
shocker there and the
perplexed.
story for me. Yeah, that they were like, what did they think they were talking? And I mean, I don't know. Anyone could see a photo of you, you would think you were part of some group other than white.
Yes. So that was the very perplexing thing about that situation too. But I think when push come to shove, she said a few things, and I just pretty much felt really compelled to speak because it was too much now. And I said, hey, you do realize I'm Black, essentially, right? And this is not acceptable. And that's really when it kicked off, and she put me on probation and review, and there was a lot of nastiness going on where she got all this false feedback from the other team members that I was performing poorly. And then also my buddy who had been assigned, they just sort of tag team and just really making my life very difficult. And I just felt very isolated, and I was feeling really suicidal because I was constantly coming to this workplace where I felt everybody was against me,
They
or
were.
those
Yeah.
who all those who didn't want to be against me, they had to keep their mouth shut because she was in a position of power where she can navigate and sort of play chess. So
Yeah.
if you speak up, you're going to be axed too. And so it was really overwhelming. But thankfully, thanks to the grace of God, but also just from what I learned in my past racial incidents in college, I decided that I wasn't going to be a stat, that I wasn't going to leave this place without speaking up. And thankfully as well that my neighbor had won lawsuits in workplace racism, and so I spoke with her, learned what to do, and also because I'm also a scientist and investigation just comes second nature perhaps for me. I started to document all the incidents, time, date, place, person, and got really prescriptive about it. And I took sort of the emotional aspect of the situation at bay and made it very practical and empirical. And so when the time came to have that conversation, I was prepared because I knew that at this point, the data is what's going to help me, not me crying and saying, oh, she's being racist. If I'm going to say you're racist, I'm going to need evidence to prove that. And so that's where really speaking with my neighbor helped me to understand the laws about it and so forth. And when we did end up having my probation review at the time, she thought she had me cornered in a place that she was going to extend it based on false, again, evidence. But thankfully, some of the team members came forth and said, look, this is the feedback we've given you. I don't know if your manager is going to give you this feedback, but I just feel compelled for you to know what we said. And so you have that evidence. So that really helped as well, because I got proof of the feedback that they had given, which was completely different to what she was claiming.
Which is such overhand. Oh, like I wanted to kill this woman when I was reading this.
Yeah.
No, I know. But you got her. You really called her on her shit, boy. I want to hear about that.
So, we had the HR meeting, and HR really didn't see it coming. And that was very intentional, because when I make my mark, I make sure that you are not prepared, because that's how I'm going to get you. But, I've learned to find other ways to do it too. But at the time, I kept all the evidence quiet, and I came into that meeting prepared. I even recorded her. And so I had a lot of evidence. And at that point, I also made that decision of long term, is this something I want to take to court? I could probably win, but is this the path I want? And I made that decision that it wasn't, and it wasn't because it didn't matter to me. What mattered is that the truth got out, and that she knew that I was not the person to mess with, and that from now on, it's on her record. It wasn't so much to drag it out into court, because that wasn't an ordeal I was willing to take. I could, and I probably would have won, and I'm sure my neighbor would have assisted me in that. But at that point, I made that decision that wasn't really what I wanted out of the situation. It was more for me to stand up for something I believed in, but also as an indicator, hey, it's noted now, it's on your records. And if you repeat this, then there's going to be serious repercussions. I don't know how many other people she's had under her wing that she's probably spoke to in this regard, or just, being so careless about stuff like that, which is very important. And so for me, it was more, I think, for me to stand up to such racist acts, and not so much take it to court and so forth, although that could have been an option. So yeah, we had the meeting, and we got to our negotiations. And for me, it was really to just leave that toxic environment on my own terms. And we reached that partly because I had the evidence, and they knew I had the upper hand.
So beautiful. Everyone listening is probably like, go girl. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. Justice, and a little bit of justice. I mean, the full justice would have been completely busted for it, full force of the law, but you know what? You did what you had to do. So let's talk a little bit about some of the shifts that we can make in thinking. You talk, in the end, about like this mindset medication, this sort of like reset, how you can look at things differently. And let's see, one of the things here one of the things I wanted to bring up is you mentioned that you're an INTJ in the Myers-Briggs personality test.
Yes.
So I'm an ENTJ, but I have a friend who's an ENTJ who moved to an INTJ 20 years later, took the test, and we're different. But if anyone's out there, and the reason I bring it up is because Aden mentioned how revealing it was about herself and what she learned. And I feel the same way. I took that test when I was 22 and I took it again in my 40s, and it was exactly the same. And I learned so much from it. So I just wanted to bring that up. But you talk about some of these shadow types, and we've got the controller shadow type, the warrior type, the pleaser. Let's talk about how that's related to language. You talk about morning routine, but also changing language, like I'll get this done to versus I will, or like I'll try to get this done versus I will get this done. And I love these little trips, tips for people to kind of see where they can shift.
Absolutely. Yes. So language is everything. And as an NLP practitioner, I learned that even more. So I look at our mind more of like as a Google processing system. So anything that we put in, the output is a reflection of the entry point. So on a Google search, you say, how do I do this? And so you get multiple results. And in the way we speak, so if I am saying, I can't do it, ultimately what I'm saying to my subconscious mind, which is the server here, is all the ways in which I can accomplish this task, I can accomplish this goal, this vision, whatever that may be for you. And for me, for just to give example, when I first started the business, if I had said, I have no business background, I can't do it, then I wouldn't have done it, because I'm not giving myself the ability to think a positive perspective or to intentionally change the trajectory of my outcome. So when I say I can do it, it's very intentional, because I'm not saying that that it's not a challenge. I'm just choosing to put action at the forefront. And so by using action-based words like I am, I will, I can, those will register in the subconscious processing and give me the outputs on ways I can get there. So there's multiple ways to get to the destination, and the word and language choice I use will determine how I get there. And so that's why I give tips on how to change language. For example, I wish, it's such a commonly used term. I've used it, and sometimes I have to check myself too. As lovely as it sounds, a wish is a wish. It's a thought that's not really going to come to fruition unless there's action involved. And so turning things that we wish into words that are action based will actually start to activate the strategy in the subconscious mind on how to get that, or attract the people and the resources that will make that happen. And with I am, that is such a powerful statement starter, because our identity plays a big role in the way we achieve things. And so just to give you example, if I say I am not a successful entrepreneur, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. If anything I say I am, I become, if I repeat it enough times. And so the reverse of that is true. So if my goal is to be a successful business owner, whatever that may be for you, and think about the thought. Am I saying I'm good at it, or am I not good at it? And reverse engineering that and repeating that through daily affirmations or statements will then change the thought process, because the formula is essentially thought plus emotion equals behavior. This is how we work. And so with words such as I am, I can, I will, that is the seed that's going to be planted, and then that will bloom into the outcome we seek and desire.
Oh, perfectly put. That's a way to wrap that up. And also, I think asking yourself the question when you do say I can't, when you notice you say the word can't, just stop and go, hold on a minute. Is that like really true? Do I know for sure that I can't? Now, some things you do, some things you go, and this one I really can't. But then most of the time, 99% of the time, it's stuff that you're lying to yourself. It's actually not the truth that you can't.
Absolutely.
You don't want to, you may be afraid of it yet. Look, I've had that with a million things, learning a new technology or something, right? And you're like, I can't do this. and then you go, hold on a minute. Give me a minute. I don't want to. I'm a little annoyed by it. I'm resistant. But is it really true that I can't figure this out?
Absolutely.
And every time I ask that question, I end up doing it and figuring it out. And then sort of laugh at myself, or so just get curious and go, hold on, is that really, really true though? Can I really say that, or is there somewhere where I might find space to know that I have the confidence to learn or figure it out?
Absolutely, I love that. And just want to add the power of yet. So Carl Dweck came up with that. So anything where there's resistance or you're just not sure how to get there, just add yet at the end of it. So
love that.
because that's going to make the difference between accomplishing it and staying in that procrastination mode and not doing it.
Okay, give me an example of where people could use yet that might be common, where people might need to insert that.
So, for example, I think some of the things that I've heard from my client is really when they're shifting careers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're in a new space and having to develop new skill sets that they're not familiar with. For example, with remote working. So I've had clients like, how do I develop my leadership skills when it's remote and I don't have that direct access now to my team members? So whatever that is. So I am becoming a successful leader. So I am becoming a successful leader, but right now they're not there yet, right? So they'll put a yet. So I'm in progress to being a leader, but not right now, but yet.
Right. And I like the yet being in the form of becoming, I'm on my way to, I'm in the process of, right? So if you're out there, and it goes for anything like, I have to lose weight, you're always going to be in a position where you kind of have to lose weight. So you could say, I'm in the process of becoming healthy. I'm in the process of achieving my perfect state and body for myself, or again, in the process of, I'm on my way to becoming. Those are such, again, because you want to believe it. And sometimes you don't want to declare the thing as fact, because that's like lying to yourself. You're not going to get in that belief, but everyone can get behind sort of like, maybe I can, possibly, I'm on my way, I'm in the process of. And so what a better way to look at things.
Absolutely.
What do you think about, or talk about the, I've mentioned people pleasers a lot on this show. Let's talk about that controller shadow type.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So with the controller shadow type, it's really coming from a place of fear. And so the reason that I'm going to use a perspective of my own here, that I wanted to control things and fell into that controller shadow type is from that place of fear of loss of control, that if I don't have things in order, then it's all going to fall apart. Nobody else can do it better than I can. But that comes from childhood experiences where perhaps I didn't have control, or I was silenced. And for you, it could be from experiences in your childhood or in your relationships, workspaces, where you've been in a situation that you felt that you didn't have control. So moving forward, that became an area of pain point. And so in order to sort of not repeat that process, create this defense mechanism where one has to be in control of all situation. But unfortunately, the problem with having the controller shadow type is, first of all, we can't control things.
Right. A false sense of control. Yeah.
It's a false sense of control. And what that does is actually, even energetically, it creates blockages. And in terms of also the way we think, it's that then it's always coming to the place of worst case scenario planning, or having to people please to get to the result, the intended result, instead of surrendering it and letting the flow of the universe and our intuition guide us into getting to that ultimate result that we desire. And so by applying the controller type, what it's actually doing is creating resistance. And so I didn't actually realize that until I was at that seminar, and I was ticking the boxes when he was describing the characteristics of a controller shadow type. And so what I would say is that if you find yourself being a control freak, or just having this urge to want to control every aspect of your life, I'd really encourage you to dig deep and do some reflective work to ask yourself where that's coming from, why, and what would be a healthy outlet for you to take that controller shadow type and really just release it in a healthy activity. For me, journaling was a lifesaver in that I was able to release the anger, the forms of injustice I experienced, but also this need of when I was a child wanting to have parents provide for me, and they didn't. And so I found myself in this position where I have to be in control of my life, and make sure I have money, make sure I have a job, make sure that, no, I don't have to depend on anybody, which in itself is not realistic, because I depend on software, on people. I may not consciously register it, but I'm dependent. We are all dependent. Mm-hmm. And so it was really through journaling, I was able to really unravel just the extent and depth of my controller shadow type, but then really realizing that it's needing compassion. So bringing in some of the lover archetypes, so self-compassion is going to go a long way. And that can also look like through self-care practices, journaling being one, or just doing things that make you feel in control again. So hobbies, think about things that make you happy, that you find yourself in control, and then bring that more into your day-to-day. And before you know it, the shadow type of the need to control will become silent, because it's no longer the path that you will use to get to the results that you desire.
For those people out there that might think like, I've always been this way, I can't change, tried, whatever, or thinking that it's impossible to like rewire their brains as a neuroscientist, can you explain to us like you would maybe a child so everybody can understand, including myself, but how it's possible, how this is really truly possible, that even if you have been having something all these years that's right, some of these things we've talked about, that you can change. People think that they can't. Neuroscience shows you can.
Yes, so we have beautiful neuroplasticity that also shows us that we can. In the past, we thought that, all of our thoughts and behaviors were set. And with neuroplasticity or neuroplasticity or brain plasticity, it's really just tells us the ability of our neuronal networks of the brain can change through growth and reorganization. And so with that, what we've also know as well is the growth mindset. So the neuroplasticity is just in essence an explanation of how the growth mindset works. And that is just in essence that you're not stuck. You're not in a stuck state. You stay there because you choose to do that. But because we have neuroplasticity, our brains are constantly forming. We can change. So it's really about going back to the subconscious processing that is happening. That is really the gatekeeper of change. And then making sure that you work with a professional, because this isn't something that's readily done on your own. The subconscious does require professionals to really help, and that could look like therapy, NLP practitioners, hypnotherapy, to really dig deep into the trauma responses and work to really release that and replace and put in positive statements and affirmations that will then help the subconscious to be incongruent with the conscious mind, and then in essence be able to demonstrate the emotions and behaviors that we desire. But in essence, neuroscience has shown us that in the past, we were under that impression that we couldn't change our thoughts and behaviors, and that our neuronal circuits were set. But the reality is we can change. And so with that, we can adopt a growth mindset.
Love it. Tell us how we'll put everything to connect with in the show notes, but tell us how you work with people, how we can benefit from you if someone's listening and they're like, you know what, I need to talk to her.
Absolutely. So I do mindset consulting and editorial work. So anyone who's interested, I have discovery calls to discuss further and see which service lines are available. I also have my book and other publications that I write on. So it's primarily on mindset consulting and editorial stuff. And with limiting beliefs, I have the calm mindset system. So if you find yourself that you are not really fulfilling your divine purpose, then we can go through that and see how the calm mindset system can be of service for you.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your work, being so vulnerable and writing about your personal experience. A lot of it very, very, very harrowing and full of things a lot of people are ashamed of. It is so important to be transparent. And I'm sure a lot of people who've been through stuff like that will connect and find you inspiring because you had all of that trauma and despite prevailed. In fact, what I love is that you were like, let me figure out how the mind works, because there's some people around me whose minds are fucked. I need to go figure this out. And how that led to you understand, and probably as a platform for you to rekindle some sense with your mother, which I find to be really the loveliest part of the whole thing, considering what you wrote about her. So what a great ending and proof that you can really change. So thanks again so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Everyone else, we'll see you next time. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for.
Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture. And it's my number one source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products. And I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.